It is time for the Writer's Block. We've got football to discuss. I'm Jenny Carlson here in the studios of the Oklahoman, joined by Cedric Golden in the studios of the Austin American-Statesman. Cedric, I think it's almost time for football season.
I know, man, and that almost is just, it's so torturous. We both written about everything that could happen, everything that happened last year, and juxtaposed it with what we think might happen this year. Let's get to the games, man. Let's write about some new stuff, Jen.
Yeah, no, I'm ready for that too. What has happened, not what we think might happen. So that is on the horizon, very close to us, but we're all football today, and we're going to start on, unfortunately, a somber note, Cedric, as you have written and several of your coworkers have chronicled over the last few days, the passing of Cedric Benson, the great Texas running back, spent some time in the NFL. Very much beloved in Austin, was living in that area even, died in a motorcycle crash over the weekend. Just unexpected, so young, not very far removed from his career. What's been sort of the reaction as people have started to wrap their minds around what happened with Cedric Benson?
Well, Longhorn Nation is crushed. Cedric Benson, when you talk about the greatest running backs to come through here, the line starts with Earl Campbell, Ricky Williams, Roosevelt Leaks, and Cedric Benson, and the lines after that. Those guys epitomize the position. Cedric Benson was so talented, relentless runner, the only back in school history to run for over 1,000 yards in all 4 seasons that he played. So for me, I thought it was very, very poignant that most of the people I talked to, Jen, all talked about what he did on the field, but also how tough he was, playing a tough guy's position, showing up and playing hurt and doing all of that. Now, Cedric had his problems off the field. Let's not sugarcoat it. He had some major legal issues off the field, numerous arrests in the city that plagued him during his NFL career. And I think that the one part that I think about more than anything, Jen, is once it didn't work out in Chicago, and once he got to Cincinnati, excuse me. Once he got to Cincinnati, he figured some things out professionally and put up 3 really good seasons for the Bengals, over 1,000 yards each season. But then they chose not to re-sign him because he had a couple of arrests in the offseason. So his decision-making on a personal level was really part of his story. I think it shortened his NFL career. He played 8 seasons, but he could have played a lot more. And it also ultimately cost him his life. It was a tragic accident. From reports that I've read, he was speeding on a motorcycle with a female acquaintance, and it's just one of those things. The city is in mourning because people that follow Longhorn football really respected Cedric Benson.
Yeah, and it's I think sort of resonating around my neck of the woods because we recently here found out about the passing of Mike Gaddis, who came several decades before Cedric Benson's time at Texas, but Gaddis, a running back, also the University of Oklahoma, a guy that played under Barry Switzer at a time when, as everyone knows, they ran the wishbone, they ran the ball a ton. Mike Gaddis, a local guy from the Midwest City, Del City area, went to Carl Albert High School, so very much a local talent who went to Oklahoma. He had some huge games, really put up some big numbers, but never fully saw his potential realized as several knee injuries set him back. He did make it to the NFL. Much like Cedric Benson, his career was also cut short, but again, it was because of injury, not the off-field issues, but just a huge talent, a guy that came back to the Oklahoma City area to live, raise a family. I actually talked with Mike about a year ago when Rodney Anderson, another Sooner running back, had some injuries. He was hurt several times during his career with the Sooners and had a season-ending knee injury last year. And so I talked with Mike about dealing with that. And, he obviously had that expertise, unfortunately, that he had been through those sorts of things, but just had a great perspective on things. And dying at 50 years old, which, several years older again than Cedric Benson, but a sudden death, unexpected health-related issue that ultimately ended his life. But again, two great running backs, Cedric. I mean, very different careers, very different career arcs. But, the thing that I keep coming back to is, two guys that in their own ways, much like you were talking about people there in Austin, love Cedric Benson. A lot of people in Oklahoma City love Mike Gaddis. And I think that's really, that reminds you of that connection that's established and those heartstrings that go on for years, decades. I mean, such a long time after these guys' careers are even over.
Jen, you look at it and life is fragile. We know it. Some of us will live to be a ripe old age, and some people won't. I think when you look at it, you mentioned the respect that both of those athletes engendered in their respective cities. It's all about how you'll be remembered. If people remember you fondly for helping out, and I talked to Rob Babers, who was a teammate of Cedric Benson and a former radio co-host of my own, and Rod said he was finally starting to figure some things out. He's settling into being a father, had a long-term girlfriend. Actually, it started a mortgage business, and it helped rebuild the house of one of the bombing victims from the Austin bombing a few years back. So Cedric Benson was on the right track to figuring things out. Sometimes it takes a while to figure it out. Post-NFL is no joke. Earl Campbell told me some of his toughest years were after the NFL, having to adjust to life outside the game. And it's unfortunate that Cedric won't be able to figure it out fully, because I think he was on the right track.
Yeah, definitely some somber notes there for both of those men, and obviously the legacies that they leave, the loved ones they leave behind. But again, just reminds me that these athletes who we see on the field, they really do sort of take a spot in our hearts and in our minds, and even after they've been off the field of play for a while, still we can flash back to those great moments that they've had in their careers. So lots of those guys, though, out there right now. We'll move on to segment 2. Maybe we should call this one, Cedric, Say What? I don't know if we've done a Say What segment in a while, but
it's been a minute.
This seems to fit because your friend and mine, Baker Mayfield, I say that tongue-in-cheek, but Baker Mayfield doing an extended interview and piece with GQ magazine, and some of that starting to come out and make big waves. Probably the biggest of them was what Baker Mayfield, former Oklahoma quarterback, now leading the Cleveland Browns, what he had to say about Daniel Jones, the recently drafted New York Giants quarterback. I don't know if Baker Mayfield's not making any friends in the New York City area. It's going to be tough sledding whenever he has to go to the New York area to play. He did not speak kindly about Daniel Jones or about the Giants.
The question is, why is Baker talking about other quarterbacks? What are you doing?
Why are you
Baker?
picking on Daniel Jones?
Why do you care when Daniel Jones was drafted? What if Daniel Jones said you were undersized and shouldn't have been drafted number 1 overall? Daniel Jones not speaking on you. Why are you speaking on Daniel Jones? Baker doesn't have a filter. And I think to be an NFL quarterback, eventually you're going to have to figure out that whatever you say is going to be magnetized 1,000 times exponentially. People hinge on every word you say. And so as the face of a franchise, and the Cleveland Browns are trying to come up out of the doldrums and get after teams like Pittsburgh and Baltimore and Cincinnati in the AFC North. If you want to get after those teams, don't give people ammunition to come after your knees on a blitz. I don't even know if they play the Giants this year, but I guarantee you they're going to play them sometime during Baker's career. And if you're the leader of a locker room and Baker has the respect of the players in that locker room, don't make it harder on yourself. I know that he was being candid and answering questions honestly, but you got to be smarter about what you say in a national publication. Daniel Jones surprised a lot of us by being drafted. I think it was fifth overall by the New York Giants. But let Daniel live. Let Daniel get his money. We don't need to know what Baker Mayfield thinks about a colleague. You never heard Peyton Manning ripping into Tom Brady. You don't hear Drew Brees ripping into Romo or anything, or Kirk Cousins or anybody like that. There's a fraternity. Those quarterbacks have a fraternity, and that fraternity is a one of respect because, number one, those guys don't have to play against one another. They'll never have to tackle one another. So it's the highest paid position. It's the most profitable position, the most lucrative position in the NFL. And with it comes a certain set of responsibilities. And I think Baker needs to be a little bit more responsible.
You know, I think about it from Daniel Jones's perspective. He woke up, what was that, Monday morning, and, he's just going about his business, and all of a sudden he finds himself in the middle of a firestorm involving a guy that, maybe he's met Baker Mayfield, but
Who knows?
Who knows? It had to have been sort of a, Twilight Zone moment for Daniel Jones to find himself in the middle of this. But, it's also interesting the fact that, Baker Mayfield's been a guy who's really made a career out of being, expected not to be able to do X, Y, Z. He wasn't supposed to be able to become the starter at Texas Tech as a walk-on. He wasn't supposed to be able to transfer to Oklahoma and become a starter. He wasn't supposed to be a Heisman Trophy winner or first-round pick in the draft. And yet he's basically lambasting, a guy that is trying to do what people don't think he can do. So there are ways that he could have made his point talking about, because I think he did have an interesting point, the whole notion that sometimes these NFL teams do get a little too caught up in things that, the minutia of a guy, his height, or,
the measurables.
The measurables, exactly, Cedric. So I think he had a point in some of that, but at the same time, you don't have to bring up a guy. You don't have to throw a single individual player or franchise, a franchise that may well, be providing your paycheck one day. You don't have to take that step and cause that problem. You can make that point without calling somebody out. So, again, I think it's sort of, we've talked about Baker before too, Cedric, because, I know that the Browns are ecstatic about the potential of him, the excitement this season. But don't you think somewhere in their heart of hearts they're thinking, man, could we have the good stuff and leave this behind? Isn't there a point that they have to sort of be asking Baker Mayfield to tone it down a little bit?
They have. Why wouldn't they? You've given this guy a lot of money. You've entrusted him with being the face of your franchise. You know the past. You've heard about the stories of him getting into the Kansas fans and planting the flag in Columbus, and then coming out and saying the Sooners, the SIDs made me apologize. Those are the kind of things that give you pause and make you want to second guess your decision. The only thing that I can say about it, Jen, is this: that boy can play football. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing, is that he can play football. But don't make it so hard on yourself. Yeah. If you start to make yourself out to be public enemy number one, you can't be sorry. You can't be questioning why a defensive end hit you in the knees on a blitz. So to me, I think he needs to respect the game a little bit more, respect the position a little bit more, and respect that fraternity of quarterbacks a little bit more, or things are going to get a lot harder for him. He already has to play Pittsburgh twice a year and Baltimore twice a year. Why are you adding to that load?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too. You bring up some of the comments that Baker made in that GQ story about the planting the flag and the apology after the Ohio State game last year. And people that were very supportive of him, he didn't necessarily name them, but when he's talking about leaders at OU, that would be Lincoln Riley, that would be athletic director Joe Castiglione, potentially university president at the time, David Bourne, men that were supportive of him, Lincoln Riley naming him the starter when he was the offensive coordinator. There were other instances, the arrest in the offseason, that they very much stood beside him in some instances. And after the flag planting happened, you had the whole incident at Kansas, and they also stood by him then. And here Baker is coming out and saying, he was embarrassed for them to tell me to apologize. He issued that apology apparently to Daniel Jones, but for people that have been some of his biggest supporters, he's not exactly, being that friendly with them either. It just, again, I think that you're right, Cedric. If you're going to, if you're gonna make enemies with your, conference rival, okay, I guess. But when you can't even make nice with people that are good to you, I don't know if I quite understand what's happening there.
He's a complex cat. He's painting himself into a corner. What's going to happen, Jen, is in 2 or 3 years, with a couple of Pro Bowls under his belt, because these older quarterbacks can't play forever. Brady and Rivers and Big Ben, those guys can't play forever. And Baker and Dak Prescott, who, by the way, is the epitome of what you want representing your organization, just a sharp dude who's classy and never puts his foot in his mouth. But those are the guys that are going to be leading this next crew of quarterbacks: Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, all of those guys. So Baker is right there at the head of that class, but he's going to have to learn that it's not always all about ability. It's also how you conduct yourself in front of the media, in front of the fans, in organizational activities, all of that. The camera's always on you. You're not just representing the Mayfield family anymore. You're representing the Cleveland Browns. That's a big deal.
You mentioned Dak Prescott, and that takes us into segment 3. We did say what? I'd say this is what's next, and that is the Dallas Cowboys and their young stars, most notably Ezekiel Elliot, the running back, who is still, as we record, holding out for a new contract, has not come to a deal. And now we've come to the point in all of this, Cedric, that Jerry Jones, the Dallas Cowboys owner, is making jokes about Zeke. Is that a good idea, really?
He's got the checkbook. He can do what he wants. And you know what he said, Jen, after they asked about that, when he said Zeke who? They asked him about it, and he goes, you know what? I paid for the right to joke about Zeke. And what that means is y'all have no idea how much I've invested in this kid that you don't know about outside the contract and all of that. And Jerry's basically saying, look, I sat through your 6-game suspension. I supported you here. I supported you there. And you're not in camp. So I understand why Zeke is not in camp, because in the NFL, the way it's set up, the only way to get your money if you're not a quarterback is to hold out. And that's sad to say, but that's how it's built. That's how the CBA is structured. So they need to make sure and get his butt in camp. They are a Super Bowl contender with him on the field. The pieces are in place: good defense, good receivers, good young quarterback, good offensive line, and the missing piece is Zeke Elliott, the 2-time rushing champion. He's not going to lead you to a Super Bowl if he's sipping pina coladas at Cabo. He needs to be drinking Gatorade and water and Oxnard. That's where he needs to be.
Yeah, no matter what any of these other guys they have on the roster at running back do in the preseason, I think everybody knows that Ezekiel Elliott is a difference maker at that position. Jerry Jones, he did joke about it, and maybe that rubbed Ezekiel the wrong way. Whether it did or not, I don't know. But the truth is, Ezekiel Elliott knows the truth. Jerry Jones knows the truth, and they each know that they know the truth. So while that may be a joking moment for Jerry Jones, they all know that Ezekiel Elliott needs to be on this team when this season opens. They don't need to have him still in Cabo, still on the golf course, still on the beach when they're opening the season here very soon. He has missed most of training camp. I get that. But I think that from all reports, it sounds like he's doing the right thing to get ready for the season, even though he's not in camp. You know, I have to say, Cedric, even though this is dragged on and continued and added layers of some ridiculousness as we've gone, it seems a little laughable. I can't even hardly put this on the crazy scale because of what's happening with Antonio Brown. I mean, if you want real dysfunction and lunacy in training camp, I think you start there and then way down the pecking order you go to your next one, because that whole thing with the Raiders and the helmet, everything else this preseason in the NFL has paled in comparison to that craziness.
It is so silly. And if
Crazy.
you watch Hard Knocks, it's nuts. I mean, it's a real deal. He's like, I gotta play. Well, you're not gonna play for $30 million without the right helmet. Man, for $30 million, I play without a helmet. I might be eating dinner through a straw in 6 months, but I have $30 million in the bank. I mean, come on.
Well,
he's gonna play. He's gonna play.
And is it ironic at all to anybody that the NFL, which has, fairly clearly not been real, mindful of helmets and safety and all that for the last how many ever years you want to say, they've now got these standards and they're saying, we're sorry, but your helmet doesn't match up, and yet Antonio Brown is fighting them on that? I mean, it seems a little bit odd to me that, like, the league and its track record of, head safety and brain trauma, and yet he's saying, oh, no, this is the helmet I want to use. Or
Jenny, maybe he's saying it's hot out here and I've got to think of a reason I don't have to practice in this intense heat. Because I watched Hard Knocks the other night. He's running fine. He might be, the blisters on his feet might be hurting him a little bit, but he seems to be running real well.
We haven't even talked about that cryotherapy stuff, and I don't wanna, because it makes me think about those feet, and I'm done with that.
Given on one more topic, fantasy league drafts are coming up soon, and we need Ezekiel Elliot and Melvin Gordon to sign so we know when to draft them. So if I could give Jerry Jones a little piece of advice, and I watched Rounders the other night, so in the voice of Teddy KGB, head that to mine is money.
So it's all about your fantasy league team is what we're coming around to.
Of course.
Well, it's all about your fantasy league team, and next week it's going to actually be all about actual football games. So while we've talked all football today, we're going to keep it up next week because we're actually going to be in game week. Longhorns, Sooners, Cowboys, we'll have it all to talk about. So come on back to the Writer's Block. We'll see you next week.